News live from 12 p.m.
Only on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and TuneIn apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch.
You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh my goodness me! And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
Hello, I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m, where I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians as we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight. If it's a big story, we'll be covering it, I guarantee, but we'll also have some fun along the way. That's GB News Headliners at 11 p.m. We won't put you to sleep, unlike some of the other paper review shows out there. So join us, 11 p.m, 7 nights a week.
Hello and welcome. I'm Alastair Stewart, and for the next 2 hours I'll be keeping you company on TV and radio with the stories that really matter across the country. As Liz Truss fights for her political life, I'm asking if that Marmite budget might just come to her rescue and a change in the mood music over Europe. Big players from business and politics share their views, and you have already been on fire with yours, so do keep them coming in, and I will share them back as the programme progresses. So that's now right up until 2 o'clock. But first, let's bring you right up to date with all of the day's news. Here's Polly Middlehurst.
Alastair, thank you. Good afternoon to you. Our top story on GB News. The small community of Creeslough in County Donegal, Ireland, is in deep shock today. 6 of the 10 people who were killed in a service station explosion on Friday were named locally. We understand Leona Harper, Jessica Gallagher, Martina Martin, Catherine O'Donnell and her son James, and Hughie Kelly were among those who lost their lives. Taoiseach Michael Martin visited the site of the explosion last night and says the entire nation is in mourning following the tragedy in the small village. The Irish authorities say the explosion is being treated as a tragic accident, although investigations are ongoing. Well, in news away from Ireland, 3 cabinet ministers who all stood against Liz Truss in the Conservative leadership contest are urging colleagues to unite and support the Prime Minister. Penny Mordaunt, Suella Braverman, Nadeem Zahawi are all calling for the party to unite around its new leader or risk ending up in opposition. The Environment Secretary, Ranil Jayawardena, has also written a newspaper article this morning telling the party it is time to rally round. The Scottish National Party's conference is taking place in Aberdeen this weekend. Our political editor, Darren McCaffrey, is at the event for us this morning. Darren, what's happening there today?
Well, the big conversation, unsurprisingly, potentially, is still around that big constitutional question, Scotland's place within the United Kingdom. While other political parties are talking things about the cost of living crisis, taxation and energy security, it really is Scottish independence and how the SNP try and achieve it that it's continuing to dominate the speeches and the fringe meetings here in Aberdeen. And I think for the SNP that is the big argument. We know that the Supreme Court is going to start its hearings this week in terms of whether Nicola Sturgeon will be allowed legally and legitimately to hold a referendum in October of next year. But for many people, frankly, outside of this conference centre, they would much prefer the conversation in here and elsewhere to be dominated by the health service this coming winter, schools and the standards, or indeed energy security and that cost of living crisis. Both for the SNP, they would argue all this would be much better dealt with by an independent Scotland. And it is that issue of nuclear energy that is really key in all of this today. A big debate happening. The Westminster government, Liz Truss, wants to go ahead with nuclear energy as part of the wider energy plan for the future. The SNP are opposed to that. So those frictions, those tensions between essentially the Scottish government and the Westminster government continue, not least of all because, as Nicola Sturgeon repeatedly points out, Liz Truss has yet to pick up the phone and actually talk to Scotland's First Minister.
Darren, for the moment, thanks very much indeed. Darren McCaffrey there in Aberdeen at the SNP conference, continuing into tomorrow as well. International news for you now, and Russia is assessing the damage on its only bridge to occupied Crimea after a huge blast destroyed areas of it yesterday morning. President Vladimir Putin has ordered the country's Federal Security Service, that's the FSB, to now guard the key connector to the occupied peninsula. Traffic flow, we understand, has resumed along part of the route, and the Kremlin has ordered repair work to begin immediately. The bridge is a key military supply route for Russian forces and has played a strategic role in the war, leading the Ukrainian authorities to argue the bridge is a legitimate military target. Meanwhile, at least 12 people have been killed and around 49, including 6 children, in hospital after the shelling of the Ukrainian city of Zaporizhia. Residential buildings were damaged in 12 Russian missile attacks, according to the governor of the region. The authorities say a rescue operation is underway. Here, barristers are voting on whether or not to end their strike action after receiving a pay offer from the government. The offer includes reforms to set fees for legal aid work and an investment of £54 million in the criminal bar. That's according to the Ministry of Justice. Well, the vote closes at midnight tonight. Full coverage right here, GB News. Lastly, Buckingham Palace has released a new image of one of the Queen's favourite ponies. Those watching on television may recognise Emma. There she is, the fell pony, who's 26 years old herself. And you may remember was part of the procession at the Queen's state funeral, where she stood next to the Long Walk to Windsor Castle as Her Majesty's coffin was driven past. The palace saying Emma will continue to be a much-loved figure and will be cared for, well, in Windsor. You're up to date on GB News. More news as it happens. Now back to Alastair Stewart and friends.
Polly, thank you very much indeed. In all my years, I've never seen an incoming Prime Minister hit the rock so hard and so fast. Liz Truss has been in office a little over a month. In that time, her poll ratings and those of her party have hit historic lows. The pound was there too, following a budget that panicked the money markets, drove interest rates up and the currency down. Having to sack a minister just 2 days ago for alleged gross misconduct seems small beer, but there was that too. Colleagues openly suggest that she'll be gone by Christmas, with today's papers awash with stories of various factions out to get Truss, some to get Sunak in, others for Johnson. As Kate Maltby observed in the newspaper, and I quote, Truss has inherited Johnson's ability to divide. What she lacks is his commensurate pretensions to unify. Commensurate pretension to unify. She still has time. Her conference speech stemmed the bleeding. The markets have stabilised, and most importantly, many of her internal critics still actually like her. But she needs to prove that she's a Prime Minister for the nation, not merely one political faction. Let the healing begin, if it can. Well, perhaps it has. Last week, 2 important things happened. A gathering of 44 European leaders, not a European Union event, not a European event like the old EEC days. It was held in Prague. Truss attended and was warmly welcomed. She met with Macron, and there was evidence of a post-Brexit Anglo-French rapprochement, and even positive vibes on the testy issue of that Northern Ireland protocol. Next, the markets settled down. The pound began to recover and interest rates stabilised. Yes, I know, mortgages rose, but they have across the world. So, From dead in the water to signs of life, is there a way back for Liz Truss? To discuss all of that, I have gathered a group of people who I trust to tell it straight, from the worlds of politics and business, to ponder it all. Some will wish the Prime Minister well, others would welcome her earliest possible departure. But all care passionately for this country and all care passionately about free and fair debate. We'll talk to business, we'll talk about the economy in the first hour, and then we'll dig into Europe in the second hour. Now, they and I really want to hear your hopes and fears as well. Email us at gbviews@gbnews.uk, or you can tweet me or at GBNews. We are also on Facebook. Now, that said, you have already been getting in touch on our big topic of the day. Can Liz Truss survive, should she? And will the budget eventually come good? Megan says she can, but we need to see results. Economic growth, inflation decrease, illegal immigration results, tax down. But they must publicise successes, e.g. levelling up and, says Megan, Labour incompetence. Jim says Liz Truss will survive, but she needs to concentrate on the UK rather than keep on about Ukraine, etc. Barry says the knives are out for Truss already. The media onslaught's absolutely relentless, and enemies within her own party want to get rid, no matter what she does or how things go. And finally, Patrick says, I'd like her to survive, but I don't think she can. The mainstream media's written her off and portray her as weak. She will never shake off that reputation and become an election winner. The damage, says Patrick, has been done. So keep your views coming in, and I will share more of them as the programme progresses twixt now and 2 o'clock. To help me set the scene, I'm delighted to welcome an old friend, Sean Worth. Sean's a former Downing Street advisor and now a leading political commentator. Was my thumbnail sketch broadly right, or too optimistic, or not pessimistic enough?
Broadly right, yeah, I think so. I mean, it's hard to get too optimistic, though, Alastair, at the moment, because the polls are still the worst they've ever been. But you're right, there is a chance for Liz Truss to hopefully turn them round. I think the big issue that you pointed out was her colleagues, and I think the big mistake she'd made at the beginning, I think I came on the show and said it at the time, that she didn't hire into her cabinet people from the different factions that are now out there very obviously briefing and plotting, as you say.
I mean, so much so that the Sunday papers are a collector's item today because it doesn't just say that in passing. I mean, they are specific with illustrations, little diagrams of who's who in which camp. But as Polly said in her news bulletin before we started, there are also pieces in today's paper from Penny Mordaunt, who's a bit of a rebel on boosting benefits by inflation, not the rise in earnings. There's arch-Brexiteer Bill Cash coming out on side. There's also Suella. I mean, there are voices that you might not have predicted that are on side, all saying unite or we're all dead.
Well, the only one you mentioned that isn't on the payroll is Bill Cash, though. That's the only thing. Most of them are actually on the payroll. But I think in terms of the sort of faction, if you like, that is out for her a bit, it's more the Rishi Sunak supporters, that camp. She didn't really hire anyone senior from that camp into her cabinet, and that was the big mistake. And they're the ones you need to worry about. And it's not necessarily today. It will be as she rolls forward and we get this new budget, and she's trying to produce what are called the supply side reforms that support her economic agenda. And just for in layman's terms, it's things like deregulation for business and planning reform. The only big one that you can really do to make anything happen before the election is planning. And there's no chance that that's going to get through the Commons with any of the Tories, let alone the Rishi Sunak camp. So it's very easy to have a backbench rebellion at the moment, and that's the big worry for her.
One of the great lessons from history, and it is so often the case in our conversations, is Thatcher. And Thatcher in 79 brought in a lot of the enemies, the wets, and had them there, gave them the chance. If they delivered, they survived, or got another job like Norman St John Stevens. If they didn't deliver, they were out.
Yeah, exactly. There's the cabinet.
But they were given a chance.
Yes, exactly that. There's the cabinet, which she hasn't done. I think she should try and do that as soon as possible. It does mean a reshuffle, which is very destabilising. So I don't know how quickly that can happen. But bringing, at least 2 or 3 big figures into the cabinet, say Grant Shapps, Oliver Dowd, and somebody, from the Rishi Sunak camp that can go back out to colleagues and say, look, let's calm down on this, give her a chance, let's try and push it through. But the second thing is the team around her, and MPs are already looking at that, and she does need a bigger and more experienced team, and that Conservative PMs always come in and they think, I'll have a tiny, cheap Downing Street so it doesn't appear on Twitter or The Guardian that I've busted all these costly advisors. But, the short-term pain of that is worth gold in the long run, because at the moment it does look like she really needs some people from business, the army, the NHS, just real-world experience in number 10, in a proper advisory role, not just consultants on the outside.
Let's broaden it out, as I said in my overall intro, to 2 main things that I think present an interesting backdrop. And I take your point about having some grown-up and experienced members in the intimate team there. But on the big picture, she was invited to go to Prague with 43 other government heads, and Macron was there, all the rest of them were there. She accepted. Both my chums at the BBC and ITN on the night said the most significant factor about that gathering was that she was there and was warmly received. That can change the mood music about the post-Brexit settlement.
Yeah, I do think, she has to be, I don't want to be wholly cynical on this, but she's in a really difficult position. I think she's benefited from Johnson's position on Ukraine in Europe, so people did respect that. They are annoyed about Brexit, of course, but Johnson leading the response in Europe in terms of aid, military and financial support. And she's benefited from that because she's said that she'll continue it. I'm not being unfair, and I'm just saying she's had a bit of a soft run into Europe. But, of course, she has been very strong on saying that support will continue. And that's obviously, the big issue right now in Europe, you forget the migrant crisis and the energy stuff. It's the war in Ukraine. Yeah. And what do we do about gas supplies? And on that, she's in a very good position.
Yeah, and it's a new forum. It isn't son of EU that could possibly deliver. The other interesting thing, and I thought is brilliant, was the email that came in that said, they need to publicise successes. They need to show that we are levelling up, that immigration is being dealt with, inflation is decreasing. Time is not on her side.
No. There are things you can do on the economic front to get going, but they do require capital expenditure. I'd say just build more homes and houses and infrastructure. That's the quickest way you get, quick wins. Get out in a high-vis vest, the classic PM thing. Margaret Thatcher's brilliant ones of these, giving house keys to new homeowners, all that stuff. You can do that sort of thing, but her economic plan, the liberalisation of planning and all of that will take longer than we've got till the general election. So none of that will happen.
OK. I've asked you if you'll come back at 1 o'clock. There are lots of other interesting conversations to be had, and they'll give you a cup of coffee outside and a notepad, although you always remember it brilliantly. But for now, Sean, great insights, and thank you very much indeed. Sean Worth there, who worked at the heart of Number 10 and worked with party leaders in the past and knows how these things genuinely can shift and the timescale. And I'll be talking to him again at 1 o'clock. Now, let's dig a little further still into this issue. And I'm delighted that my next conversation bolts 2 of them together. It is the economic and the business outlook with that twist about Europe. For Northern Ireland, it isn't just the budget for the United Kingdom and those issues of tax and spending. It is also the Northern Ireland Protocol issue with the European Union. So to get a view on both of those issues, I asked Roger Pollan if he would join me. Roger has been on several times before. He is the head of the Federation of Small Businesses in Northern Ireland, and also he's just back from the DUP conference. Great to see you, and thanks for fitting us in. I know it's a busy weekend for you. First, the Kwarteng budget. What did you make of it as the voice of small businesses in Northern Ireland, Roger?
Well, thanks, Alastair. Really, I think our members welcomed most of it. There was a few eyebrows raised at the 45 pence tax cut, which has obviously been reversed. But the rest of it they felt was a pretty business-like budget. They liked things like the annual investment allowance being fixed at the £1 million a year rate, which had been temporarily brought in. That's a really good incentive for businesses to invest in their future, to improve productivity, to cut down on their energy demands from elsewhere and so on. We spoke to a number of businesses yesterday who are actually going to use that allowance to invest in renewable energy for their own firms. So I think it was welcomed. The cut in national insurance was also welcomed because it leaves more money in the pockets of their employees and of the business. So that was a very good move. And there were a number of other measures in there that they really welcomed.
Help you and your members grow, boost the economy, because that's what it was all about. There are different ways of trying to do it. This is the Truss Kwarteng way of trying to do it. Do you think it'll work in terms of growth?
I think it was a good measure that will work in the longer term. There are a lot of things in it that will allow businesses to invest, to grow the economy, and that is the plan that lies behind it. I think the conversation you were having there with Sean focuses it very sharply in on the question of how long will that take? When will we see those results? So we've got to get through some very difficult times before we get to the point where that growth is really starting to materialise. But at least I think that it set out a good framework for businesses to know what they were going to be doing in the months and years ahead, and that was very welcome.
Moving on to the protocol and that meeting in Prague, I was also doing a programme here at GB News on Friday when the Coveney, Heaton, Harris talks took place on Friday, and there was definitely a much warmer, positive vibe on the protocol issue there, as there was in Prague on Thursday. Are you increasingly optimistic? Because the protocol is at the pounding heart of your ambition to restore growth to Northern Ireland.
Yes, you're absolutely right, it is. And we wrote to Liz Truss and Rishi Sunak actually in the summer to say that as they were campaigning, that they needed to focus on the protocol because it could either be the foundation stone on which a successful premiership would be built, or it will be the rock below that holds them below the waterline and sinks them. It's as simple as that. I know that seems bizarre to other parts of the UK. How can this odd legal agreement in Northern Ireland be so pivotal? But it actually underpins the relations with the EU, and the Americans similarly are taking an extremely close interest in the way the protocol plays out. They're in town this week. A lot of people from the EU are in town this week, and a lot of people from UK government are in town this week. And I think you're absolutely right. The mood music has changed enormously. That's very, very welcome. I think that most people are now saying that they recognise that significant change needs to be made. That means that our voice has been heard over the last number of months as we've articulated the problems that need to be overcome. But it's not an easy fix. Just because people are now in the room with a good heart and a good spirit to try and reach accord doesn't mean that they will. So I think they really need to focus on the much bigger picture and say, look, a place like Northern Ireland, it should not be that difficult to come to a common cause, a common agreement where we're like the union in the Venn diagram. We overlap both the UK market and the EU market. There are lots of ideas about how that can be made to work better, and get that right, then the UK's relations with the EU will be much, much better.
Absolutely fascinating stuff there. Finally, Nigel Dodds, now Lord Dodds, former leader of the DUP in Westminster, was on GB News yesterday, and he said that he welcomed the change in tone over the Northern Ireland Protocol. You're a businessman. You get things done rather than making political speeches. Do you sense that Truss has got time on her side to deliver progress before the 28th of this month and the threat of elections? Can it be done by then?
I think everybody recognises that some things can be done, but probably not enough, and not all things will be done by then. So the question is, OK, well, what does that lead to? We were very clear that although the budget was a good budget, there were measures in there, particularly around energy, that cannot yet be delivered in Northern Ireland because of the absence of a functioning executive. And that is dependent on getting the protocol sorted. So an awful lot of domestic policy is still hinging on getting this issue resolved. The deadline of the 28th of October, it seems just extraordinarily ambitious to expect that everything could be done and dusted by that stage. I'd have to say at the conference yesterday I was at, there were mixed opinions as to whether that's a realistic time frame to expect movement in. At least the context is good. The relations seem to have warmed. There have been a lot of good signals sent from all sides, but it's only 3 weeks away.
Roger, always a pleasure to talk to you, and thank you very, very much indeed for those thoughts. And you keep in touch, always welcome on the programme. Roger Pollen there, head of the Federation of Small Businesses in Northern Ireland. So, Sean Worth, it's doable politically, but time is not on her side. really positive noises there from Northern Ireland about the protocol and what's going on in Europe. So finally in this section, one of my regular go-to friends on matters economic and business, I'm delighted to welcome Lord Digby Jones, international businessman, former trade minister himself, and of course CBI boss, now a cross-bench peer. And I underline the word cross, an open mind and a very agile one. Digby, a couple of weeks ago you said you were pretty neutral on the economics of the budget. It might work, it might not, but it was steeped in bad politics because of the 45p rate being dropped. That's gone. Are you now more optimistic that this budget might just deliver?
Well, good morning to you, Alison. Good morning, everybody. I'm not more optimistic, actually, because those 2 weeks since we last had a conversation, other things have happened, and I've concluded that I'm reminded of the old Winston Churchill story. He comes onto the French bench when he was in power in the early 50s, and his aide pointed across the aisle and said, "The enemy are restless tonight, Winston." And he said, "Lad," he said, "they are the opposition." And he turned around and he said, "They're the enemy." and there's a lot in that she has declared war. It appears as if she's declared war on the British people, and she's certainly got an irreconcilable riven party, and electorates hate divided parties. And so the politics is what this has to be all about. You see, she's gone for the big one on growth. She's got an increase in borrowing of 110 billion. She's got unfunded tax cuts of 43 billion, where this party that says we are the party of sound money has said, I'm actually going to give a load of money away and I'm not even going to pay for it. I'm going to borrow it. And so she's got to get some early results. Now, what was good about your previous two speakers, they highlighted some of those areas where the growth is going to take some time to come through. And I've always said you've got to invest in two things. You've got to invest in infrastructure. One, physical, ports, energy, roads, railways, airports. And two, human. You've got to train your people. You've got to get your people better skilled to become more productive so they don't work harder, they work more cleverly. But that takes time. And what she should be doing is uniting her party. And it's in no one's interest, and I include the country, it's in no one's interest that this woman fails.
No, I agree with that, Digby. But let me just put three things to you quickly. You can't deny that the pound has recovered from those stormy days and that interest rates have stabilised, albeit at a higher level, but that is the case around the world. And in November, you will get the sums from the OBR and from Kwasi Kwarteng and those supply-side things that you are talking about. That's only within a month. I think you're being pessimistic, which is very unusual for you.
Yeah, I am being pessimistic about the conclusions of the growth strategy, which you rightly say we'll get an interim report in November. But I'm talking politics here, Alastair. And somebody on the doorsteps in those red wall seats, somebody on the doorsteps in Middle England, they will not actually worry that much about that. It'll be the mood music, how it feels. They should be concentrating on the fact that in Keir Starmer, they've got a man who voted for and campaigned for Jeremy Corbyn to be Prime Minister. Why isn't she turning her guns on that? Why? Because she's got to defend her position against her own party. Why isn't she actually campaigning and moving towards saying this strategy will give you more money? The ideology is winning. So, for instance, she's having a battle about whether you give benefits and increase it at the rate of inflation or the rate of average earnings. Now, ideology tells you average earnings, and there's a great deal of reason why. But if you want to win in those red wall seats that went blue, you don't do it. You go with the inflation rise. But ideology is winning. Ideology is beating common political sense. And until she changes that, whatever they say in November, Alastair, the mood music on the doorstep will not change. And I think what we have seen this week means the damage limitation means that if there's a general election It wouldn't be wipeout a la Canada those years ago when Trudeau completely wiped out the Conservatives. But you would get a Blair 97 type landslide. And she's got to stop that. And she's got to unify, one, go after Starmer, two, and then give some red meat to those MPs defending their 3,000, 4,000 majorities in all of the red wall. And if she doesn't, she's got to park her ideology to another day, and she's got to fight a political war. Because if she doesn't, then, well, if I was Starmer, I'd go up to a Scottish island and sit there for 2 years and then come back as Prime Minister, you know. Because I've rarely seen such a massive, wonderful effort of political suicide in my life. And if you were Thatcher or if you were Blair, you would never be doing it like this.
All right, we've got to leave it there only because of the clock, but you know very well you're welcome on this programme any time, but time is against us on this occasion. But a very crisp analysis and balancing very well with my other two guests. Great to see you, Digby. Bless you all and keep in touch. See you soon. Look, Digby Jones there, international businessman, former trade minister, CBI boss now, crossbench peer, saying it like he sees it. It's politics. Get in there. Don't make enemies of the people. Make enemies of the opposition. You're watching and listening to Alastair Stewart and Friends with lots more still to come on today's programme, including today the second day of the SNP party conference in Aberdeen. Nicola Sturgeon, senior SNP figures and ordinary party members meet in person in Scotland for the first time since the pandemic. Our political editor, Darren McCaffrey, is there and will bring us right up to date next. But first, let's bring you up to date with the weather.
So looking ahead to this afternoon then, and the UK is looking mainly dry for southern and central areas, but wet and windy in the north. Let's home in on that detail. So wet and windy this afternoon for Scotland, with gales actually decreasing in the north for a while. Skies likely to brighten in the west later, highs of 14. And that wet and windy weather continuing across Northern Ireland. Drier and brighter weather though moving in later. Northern England will begin dry and bright this afternoon, but rain arrives later towards dusk. Winds strengthening, highs of 15 or 16 Celsius. Let's look at Wales now. Mainly dry and bright this afternoon, but turning increasingly cloudy and patchy rain developing across the far northwest. Winds strengthening with highs of around 17. The Midlands remaining dry until after dark, with the best of the sunshine across the east of the region. Those southwesterly winds picking up with highs reaching the mid-teens. And focusing on East Anglia, that's dry and fine this afternoon. Plenty of spells of sunshine, in fact. The southerly breeze strengthening, highs of 18 or 19. So that dry weather continuing then for the south of England, or the western areas will see skies turning increasingly hazy through the afternoon. Highs 18 or 19. Tempered slightly, we're told, by the breeze. And that band of rain continuing to move south as we move into the evening. Blustery showers following on, and that's how the weather's shaping up for today.
Weekday afternoons on GB News, we've got the whole of the UK covered. From 12 to 3, it's GB News Day with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Gloria Di Piero. You'll get the very latest on everything that's been going on across our great nation.
And from 3 till 6, watch out for GB News Live with me, Patrick Christys. I'm not here to mess around. With all the biggest topics and guests, you will always be up to date. GB News Day and GB News Live from 12 p.m.
Only on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and TuneIn apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch.
You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh, my goodness me. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
Hello, I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m, where I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians as we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight. If it's a big story, we'll be covering it, I guarantee, but we'll also have some fun along the way. That's GB News Headliners at 11 p.m. We won't put you to sleep, unlike some of the other paper review shows out there. So join us, 11 p.m, 7 nights a week.
This Sunday afternoon and the headlines this hour. A community is in shock and tributes are being paid to 10 people, including 3 children, who were killed in an explosion at a petrol station in County Donegal in Ireland on Friday. Well, Dougie Beattie is in the village of Creesla this day for us. Dougie, how is the community processing their deep grief today?
It's very hard for them. Their first real worship mass was held here at 11 o'clock this morning, and the community have got together to try and figure out where exactly is wrong. It's the first day that we've been seeing photographs of some of the victims, learning some of the names, learning a little bit about them, and trying to get to some understanding of what they were doing here and how unfortunate it was that they were there and that some other people in the village saying to me it could have been them. At this moment in time, the Health and Safety Authority, along with special technical teams of the Garda Síochána, have entered the premises. They are now looking for clues as to what exactly happened and what caused this disaster. This village here will be burying many people over the next while or two, the next week or so, and if you think about it, some will not just be going to one funeral, many will be going to 10.
About their investigations and how they're treating this inquiry. What is the latest on that?
Well, it is being treated as an accident, although the sheer numbers of Health and Safety Authority people that are in here this morning would suggest that that will be combed over very, very precisely, looking for every single clue that is in there and looking to find out exactly what happened and what caused it, and could it have been avoided. I think that's probably the most important question, and that's not just for the prosecution side of it. It's so as the people that died in this, their relations, can actually understand what went wrong. It is unlike lots of other terrorist attacks or anything else. These people weren't a target. They were on their everyday business that was just going about and were unlucky enough to be there. And for the closure of that sort of grief, that really, really needs to be found out.
Dougie, thank you. Dougie Beattie there for us in County Donegal in Ireland. Now, continuing with the news, and 185 people, including 19 children, have died in protests across Iran. Demonstrations began in mid-September after the funeral of Mahsa Amini, who died after she was detained by the morality police over allegations she was wearing her hijab too loosely. According to Iran human rights group, hundreds of high school girls and university students have all been taking part in protests right across the country, despite claims the authorities are using tear gas and live ammunition. And here, Buckingham Palace has released a new image of one of the Queen's favourite ponies. If you're watching on television, you'll see Emma, the fell pony. She was part of the procession at the Queen's state funeral and stood next to the long walk at Windsor Castle as the Queen's coffin was driven past. The palace says Emma will continue to be much loved and cared for as the Queen would have wished in Windsor Castle. Those are the headlines. You're up to date on TV, online and on DAB+ radio. You're with GB News. Now back to Alastair.
Polly, thanks very much indeed. Today marks the second day of the SNP conference in Aberdeen. It's the first time that delegates have met in person in the city since the pandemic. SNP leader and First Minister Nicola Sturgeon announced this morning that she is confident that the Scottish independence referendum can be held next October. One notable takeaway so far is that the SNP have ramped up attacks on the Labour Party, as they could very well be their biggest opposition in Scotland, according to the latest polls. Interesting to bear in mind what Digby Jones just said about who Liz Truss's target should be in a similar context right across the UK. So great food for thought there. I'm delighted to say that we can go live now to Aberdeen, where GB News political editor Darren McCaffrey is for us watching proceedings. Darren.
Yeah, very good afternoon to you, Alice. As you said, this is the first time the SNP party has managed to gather here in Aberdeen since the pandemic began, and unsurprisingly it is this same issue, the constitutional question, which is dominating affairs here. Listening to the speeches on the platform, listening to the fringe events, Scotland's place within the UK continues to dominate politics in this part of the UK, as it has done for the last decade and a half. And I think in many regards, maybe that shouldn't come as a surprise, given the fact that the SNP feel that they're emboldened by the victory of the Holyrood elections, the fact that most MSPs do support Scottish independence, and yet they feel blocked in, if you like, by the UK government in all of this. The Supreme Court, the UK Supreme Court, is going to look at this possibility that Nicola Sturgeon could hold a referendum in October of next year. It's what she wants. Can she legally call one? Well, it's what those judges are going to look at. Most people seem to think that is unlikely, given the fact that Westminster is saying it is up to them to decide whether a referendum should happen. And clearly the British government has made it very, very obvious over the last couple of years that that is not going to happen. They say that opinion polls show there's not been a massive surge towards independence popularity. But what it does mean is Nicola Sturgeon's having to come up with this kind of plan B idea, if you like, Alastair, this idea that maybe using the Westminster general election in 2024 as a kind of de facto referendum, though I'm not entirely sure how that's going to work. And while all this has been talked about here in Aberdeen inside the conference centre about the future of Scotland's place within the UK, for many outside they would rather Nicola Sturgeon focused on other issues, the energy security problems, whether it's the cost of living crisis, the NHS this winter, standards in schools, though the SNP do argue that these things will be better sorted out or easier with an independent Scotland. It is a reminder that politics here is different, very different from the rest of the UK. And the big debate today is actually on the issue of nuclear power. The UK government, Liz Truss, saying that that has to be part of the UK's energy security into the future. It is something the SNP are opposed to. We'll hear John Sweeney, the deputy, to talk about that a little bit later on. So it is fascinating, it's interesting, it's always a reminder, as I say, that politics is different north of the border, if you like. But there is a sense here that the SNP are also not just attacking the Conservatives this weekend and Liz Truss and the budget and all that sort of stuff, but also the Labour Party too. And that may be because Labour are actually doing quite well in the polls recently here. And that could prove problematic, of course, for the SNP into the future.
Stuff there about the SNP specifically and the state of politics generally in Scotland. Darren, thank you very much indeed, and keep in touch. Any further developments, and I know that you'll be popping into this programme or other programmes as the day progresses. But from me, thank you very much indeed. GB News political editor Darren McCaffrey there, live for us at the SNP party conference. You're watching and listening to Alastair Stewart and Friends, and we've plenty more still to come this afternoon as it inches up to 20 minutes before 1, including our rural spotlight. We're heading to Wales, where the government's delayed new rules aimed at reducing agricultural pollution in rivers by 3 months. We'll be speaking to a Welsh farmer next, who can tell us more about that. But first, a quick break.
Weekday afternoons on GB News, we've got the whole of the UK covered. From 12 to 3, it's GB News Day with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Gloria Di Piero. You'll get the very latest on everything that's been going on across our great nation.
And from 3 till 6, watch out for GB News Live with me, Patrick Christys. I'm not here to mess around with all the biggest topics and guests. You will always be up to date. GB News Day and GB News Live from 12 p.m.
Only on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and TuneIn apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch.
You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh my goodness me! And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
Hello, I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m, where I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians as we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight. If it's a big story, we'll be covering it, I guarantee, but we'll also have some fun along the way. That's GB News Headliners at 11 p.m. We won't put you to sleep, unlike some of the other paper review shows out there. So join us, 11 p.m, 7 nights a week.
Welcome back. It's 17 minutes to 2 and you're watching and listening to Alastair Stewart and friends here on GB News. I asked you last night and again this morning to send your emails in, and I am awash with them, and I'm not complaining for one moment. We're asking whether Liz Truss can survive, and not like one emailer. I'm not saying she shouldn't. I'm asking, can she? And the issue of Europe and the issue of the budget. So we're just asking the questions, my dear friend. We're not saying she should or should not. The first email comes from Hush, who says she needs to survive by hook or by crook. It'll be the end of the Conservatives as we know it. If she doesn't, then God help us. What have the Conservatives done? 80-seat majority. Just imagine. They lost the dream ticket. Boris, one just wants to scream. Idiots. Just idiots. Well, there you go. Thank you, Hush. Andy says Truss was elected by the members. She's doing a great job with excellent ministers. Unfortunately, the mainstream media are determined to see her fail. And Karen, perhaps prompted by Digby Jones's reference to Churchill, comes up with a cracker. Karen says, our Prime Minister needs to stand up to the mainstream media journalists and activists. As Winston Churchill once said, nothing in life is so exhilarating as to be shot at without result. Brilliant. Thank you very much indeed. So do keep them coming in. I've got 2 more pages there, but time is against us. It's getting up towards 1:45, and I've lots more to pack in before the top of the hour. And then we've got a second hour. We'll be talking to David Livington and John Redwood. You won't want to miss those conversations either. Keep the views coming in. And also subscribe to our YouTube channel. We're at GB News, and you can see previous programmes and previous interviews. Now, for some time, there's been grave concern about the pollution of our rivers and the mixed messages emanating from government, both the United Kingdom and also the nations of the United Kingdom, central and across the piece, about the role of farming in preserving the environment. So for today's Rural Spotlight, we're heading to Wales, where controversial rules aimed at reducing agricultural pollution, particularly in rivers, are being delayed by 3 months. Ministers will also consult on a licensing scheme, giving more generous allowances for farmers spreading slurry and fertiliser on land. Well, the farming unions and opposition parties are opposed. Joining me now to discuss this is Gareth Wynne-Jones, a farmer based in Snowdonia, where his family have farmed for 350 years. He says farming's not a job, it's a way of life, and he enjoys producing food for other people and his family in a sustainable way. Great to see you, Gareth. What is the problem with these new proposals?
Well, the new proposals would have been really difficult because people haven't got the infrastructure there, and they would have to cut down on their stock immensely. We need storage if we're not allowed to put our fertiliser, our manure onto the land during the winter months. Let's not forget fertiliser is at its peak in price at the moment. So when we're using the natural fertiliser, you know, the manure and the slurry, no farmer wants any drop of that to go into the river. Let's not forget that. I think we need to address a few things as well. Look at some of the water companies that are pouring raw sewage into our rivers and into our seas, and that should be addressed before the finger is pointed at the farming industry. Yes, there's been problems in over the years, but there's a lot of new regulations. There's a lot of red tape that's come in that's helped this. But if Welsh Government going forward want to put this onto the shoulders of farmers and offering 20 million on schemes to get this developed, 20 million is peanuts compared to what it's going to cost every one farmer to store his manure over the winter months. So it needs to be addressed, and we need to look at it because we are at a food crisis and we need to be growing more of our own food in this country. We need to be more self-sufficient, and by bringing rules and regulations in like this, it's not helping the situation. So, I've got to say, well done to Plaid Cymru, Mabon ap Gwynfor, who has worked really hard, and the NFU, who've done a great job at having a little bit more time, a little bit more breathing space. To the people that are working the land, Alastair, who are under enough pressure without having more pressures on our shoulders, we need to be working together. And Welsh Government, are good at a lot of things, but they need to listen to the people. And I'm so glad that they're having this consultation time now.
Well,
and
let me say on that point about consultation, and free country, you're entitled to say what you want about Plaid Cymru or the Conservatives or any of the others. But you mentioned the government there, and the First Minister, Mark Drakeford himself, addresses two of your key points. He says the level of pollution incidents in the agricultural sphere is damaging the reputation of farmers, and they are damaging our environment. You mentioned the water companies. As far as Drakeford's concerned, you're the biggest offenders.
Well, that's a bit of bull, I would say to you. Literally, that's a lot of manure. Definitely the water companies are polluting a lot more than the farmers. Look, this is liquid gold to us. Manure is so important for us, and going forward with the price of artificial fertiliser at the moment at its absolute peak, no farmer is going to pour a drop of slurry into the river, and no farmer is going to put manure onto that ground unless it's soaked into the ground and not into the seas and into our watercourses. So, I disagree with him. Yes, we need legislations. Yes, we need rules and regulations. Don't get me wrong. But pointing the finger at the farmer again is an easy escape for them. They need to be working with us. So this consultation period now and farmers getting their voices heard is very, very important. And do you know what? Leslie Griffiths, who's the agricultural minister or minister for the environment, has been up on the farm. I've had Lee Walters up here on the farm. He's a deputy minister. These people have been up here and they've seen what we're doing up here. It's environmentally producing food of top quality. We have got some of the best farmers in Britain, but we need support. We need less red tape, and we need to be working with government, not fighting them tooth and nail with every single situation. They need to be listening to the people that are producing the food and working the land.
Well, a fascinating conversation. Could have gone on forever, except we are moving towards the top of the hour. But I'm glad you had your say and did it very calmly there, explaining what the challenges were. And I personally, and we here on GB News, absolutely agree with you 100% about the need to protect our farmers and support them in providing good quality food for all of us across the United Kingdom, not only in Wales. With that, I wish you well. Keep in touch, Gareth, and let's know how it goes. And next time you have a few ministers coming up to the farm, give us a bell and we'll talk to you about what they said to you. But for the time being, Gareth Wyn-Jones, thank you very much indeed. Have a great Sunday afternoon. Brilliant. The authentic voice there in Snowdonia of Welsh farming. And I hope that helped you understand some of the problems that they are facing. And his reference to fertilisers, remember, that's Ukraine. So if they want to buy chemical fertilisers, it's very, very difficult now. That's why slurry and natural fertiliser, manure, is so important to people like him. Now, last weekend's London Marathon was even more of a challenge, what with the rail strike and just getting to the start of it. But once again, tens of thousands of people did it, some for themselves, but many for the good causes that they were running for. One such hero was Steve Rajan, who was doing it for our local Hampshire hospice, my beloved Naomi House, Jack's Place. Steve, having done little or no sport since his early 20s, took up running in 2004 after deciding that he needed to do something to get fit. And 4 years ago, he celebrated Naomi House's 21st anniversary by running 21 marathons in as many days, smashing his fundraising target and netting £160,000. I'm delighted to say that Steve joins me live now, so I can say, live on television, nice to see you again and well done. But what made you decide that you wanted to do this superhuman effort on behalf of the lovely people at Naomi Jack?
Well, Alastair, as you know, I've supported Naomi House and Jack's Place now since 2004, and I'm always looking for a big challenge where I can raise more money. And on June the 6th this year, I turned the age of 60. So a couple of years ago, when I was out on a run, I thought I've got one more big challenge left in me, and I thought, well, the numbers all stack up. I'm 60 on the 6th of the 6th. So why don't I go for a challenge that has those numbers in there and run 60 marathons in 60 days at the age of 60 with an audacious target to try and raise £600,000. And that's where the focus has been. It's always been on Naomi House.
Yeah, well, again, because we've talked about it, but the across the country, we're both very pro Naomi, but any hospice, it provides such a superb service to those folk facing incredibly difficult times, which we all pray jointly folk don't have to face, but occasionally they do. Talking about facing huge challenges, I mean, you've done that bit, which in itself is quite extraordinary, but you also took on the gruelling Marathon De Saab, where contestants have to run 156 miles across the Sahara Desert in 6 days while carrying kit on their back, and in your case, not without incident.
That's correct. So back in 2012, at the age of 50, you can see how all the numbers are stacking up. I came up with a plan to do 50 at 50, to raise £50,000 at the age of 50. And having run marathons over the previous years, people get bored of sponsoring you just to run another marathon. So I thought I need to take it up a notch. So I decided to take on what was billed at the time as the toughest foot race in the world and take on the Marathon De Saab. My target was to raise £50,000. We raised £86,000 in the end. And as you can see, just over my right-hand shoulder here, a gift from the children at Naomi House to celebrate that, the number 50 with their hand and their footprints to celebrate completing the Marathon De Saab.
They're remarkable kids, and they are truly remarkable members of staff as well. In terms of the 60 marathons in 60 days, away from the emotion and the money bit of it, I mean, it must take a heck of a lot of planning just to know where you need to be at what various time, where you can rest, how you can refuel and get ready to go. Do you have support in that, or are you just a brilliant logistics man yourself?
No, I have incredible support from my wife as well. My wife, Jerry, who is there, has been through all of these challenges with me, and she really has been the silent and unsung hero of all of this. So she helps me plan all of these out, make sure that I've got the right food, the right nutrition, everything around me that I need. She helps me work out the schedules. I reach out to all my family and friends, and people have found out about the events. And have just contacted me directly and said, can we run with you? Can we cycle with you? And that's one of the most important things around both 21 in 21 and the 60-day challenge, is that I am incredibly well supported with cyclists, with runners. Some of these runs I'm starting at 4 a.m. in the morning because I'm still doing a normal working day in amongst all of this. And people are turning up at 4 o'clock, at 6 o'clock. I'll tell them where I'm running the route, and I'll turn up at 12 miles at 6:30 in the morning, and the two runners that said they're going to be with me are there waiting for me. So it's a real group effort, and without them, I really couldn't do it.
We also noticed while you were talking there, for folk listening to our conversation on radio rather than TV, because as you know we do both, there was somebody on horseback as well who joined at one stage.
Yes, my very good friend Melvin is a keen horse rider, and we're down here in the New Forest, so it complete sense. So on 2 occasions he came out and he did the full 26 miles with me on his horse, and that's fantastic. It's about engaging with the community as well.
Yeah. The final question, and it's a quick one. My daughter did the London Marathon a couple of years back, and she said the one thing that she was completely unprepared for was the phenomenal buzz amongst the runners, a collective purpose that kept her going.
It is, without question, the best marathon in the world to run. I've run Berlin and Paris and Barcelona and many other ones, but London has got this buzz, this awe about it, this support, no matter who you are, where you're from. You've got your name on your shirt. You hear your name being called out by people. If you pull over and you rub your legs, someone will come over and say, "Are you okay? Here's some water." It's absolutely incredible, and it keeps people going. And, there's the elites that get through it very quickly, but those people at the back that are doing it in, 6-7 hours, people are still there cheering them on. And it is just fantastic. It is by far the best marathon in the world.
Brilliant stuff, Steve. Good luck with all of it, and thanks for doing it for Naomi. You know that they are eternally grateful to you and your colleagues. Keep in touch and let us know how it goes. Thank you very much indeed. The great Steve Rajan there, running and aiming to do 60 marathons in 60 days for the great Naomi House Hospice and Jack's Place. Look him up. He's an extraordinary guy. You're watching and listening to Alastair Stewart and Friends. We've lots more coming up on the programme this afternoon in our second hour, including more on the meeting with Macron and other European leaders. Will it be enough to kickstart Liz Truss's relationship with Europe and forge a new relationship between the United Kingdom and Europe? But first, before all of that, a quick break.
Weekday afternoons on GB News, we've got the whole of the UK covered. From 12 to 3, it's GB News Day with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Gloria Di Piero. You'll get the very latest on everything that's been going on across our great nation.
And from 3 till 6, watch out for GB News Live with me, Patrick Christys. I'm not here to mess around with all the biggest topics and guests. You will always be up to date. GB News Day and GB News Live from 12 p.m.
Only on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens,
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and TuneIn apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch.
You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh my goodness me. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
Hello, I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m, where I'll be joined by 2 of the country's top comedians as we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight. If it's a big story, we'll be covering it, I guarantee, but we'll also have some fun along the way. That's GB News Headliners at 11 p.m. We won't put you to sleep, unlike some of the other pay-per-review shows out there. So join us, 11 p.m, 7 nights a week.
One minute past 1. Hello and welcome. If you've just joined us, hello and thanks for being with us since 12 o'clock, if you've been good enough to do that. I'm Alastair Stewart and we are into our second and final hour of the programme, keeping you company on TV and radio. We've plenty more still to come, including more on our top discussion about Liz Truss's political premiership and her problems, how the budget and how Europe may impact upon the immediate future. Also following on from her Truss visit to see French President Macron in Prague, what do you yourselves make of her attempt to build a better relationship with Europe? But first, we're going to bring you right up to date with all of the news so far today. Here again is Polly Middlehurst.
A small community in Ireland is in deep shock today as 10 people who were killed in a service station explosion in County Donegal on Friday have been named by police. We understand James O'Flaherty, Martin McGill, Robert Garr and his daughter Shauna, Leona Harper, Jessica Gallagher, Martina Martin, Catherine O'Donnell and her son James and Hughie Kelly were among those who lost their lives in the small-knit community of Creesla in County Donegal in Ireland. Well, the Taoiseach, Michael Martin, visited the site of the explosion last night and he said the entire nation is in mourning today following that tragedy. The Irish authorities say the explosion is being treated still as a tragic accident, although investigations are ongoing. In other news today, 3 cabinet ministers who all stood against Liz Truss in the Conservative leadership contest are urging colleagues to unite and support the Prime Minister. Penny Mordaunt, Suella Braverman and Nadhim Zahawi are all calling for the party to unite around its leader or risk ending up in opposition. The Environment Secretary, Ranil Jayawardena, has also written a newspaper article this morning telling the party it's time to rally round. Well, the Scottish National Party's conference is taking place in Aberdeen this weekend. Day 2, our political editor, Darren McCaffrey, there live for us. Darren, what are you expecting from conference today?
Well, in many regards, actually, what we've been hearing for the last day or so, and that is very much this conference is focused on Scotland's place within the UK, about that Scottish independence question. And in many regards, we're not really expecting any big announcements from here in Aberdeen, not least of all because Nicola Sturgeon has already set out our strategy of trying to achieve that. She was saying this morning she is not prepared to give up on the question of independence for Scotland, despite, of course, Westminster insisting that they are not prepared to grant a referendum anytime soon. And there has been, unsurprisingly, criticism, of course, of the Westminster government from Nicola Sturgeon on the TV this morning. She talked about the Conservative Party and how she detested the Tories and everything they stood for. That's got some criticism from those who think that language is a little too strong. But she had also a stinging attack for Sir Keir Starmer as well, saying that she was really disappointed that Labour and its leader had thrown in the towel when it came to Brexit and a relationship with the European Union. So, yes, there is talk about the cost of living crisis. Yes, there is talk about the NHS this winter. But overwhelmingly, this conference is still focused on that big constitutional question.
And Darren, is there a sense, do you think, that Nicola Sturgeon reading the room wrongly or SNP reading the room wrongly when the cost of living crisis seems so much more important than India F2 to the ordinary man in the street?
Yeah, I think there is to a degree, in the sense that this is clearly the big issue that is focused, or should be focused on, this coming autumn and winter, given the fact that it's going to impact everyone across not just Scotland but the rest of the UK as well. And many people outside of this hall would say that is what this government, the Scottish government, should be primarily focused on, not big constitutional questions. Though, you know, the SNP would also argue that many of these decisions are not made here in Scotland. They're actually made at Westminster, and that is why they're pretty brutal when it comes to that budget and everything that has flowed from it. But yes, is the frustration that yet again politics here is continually dominated by that constitutional question? You bet there is, Polly.
Darren, thank you. Darren McCaffrey there in Aberdeen at the SNP conference into its second day. International news out, and Russia is assessing the damage on its only bridge to occupied Crimea after a huge blast destroyed large areas of it yesterday. President Vladimir Putin has ordered the country's Federal Security Service, that's the FSB, to guard the bridge now as a key connector to the occupied peninsula. Traffic flow, we understand, has resumed along part of the route, and the Kremlin has ordered repair work to begin immediately. Ukraine, for its part, has previously said the crossing is a military target, legitimately, but it hasn't directly claimed responsibility for the attack. Meanwhile, at least 12 people have been killed and around 49, including 6 children, in hospital after the shelling of the Ukrainian city of Zaporizhia. Residential buildings were damaged in 12 Russian missile strikes, according to the governor of the region. The authorities say the rescue operation is ongoing. Here, barristers are voting on whether to end strike action after receiving a pay offer from the government. The offer includes reforms to set fees for legal aid work and an investment of £54 million in the criminal bar. That's according to the Ministry of Justice. The vote closes midnight tonight. And lastly, Buckingham Palace has released a new image of one of the Queen's favourite ponies. If you're watching on television, you'll be able to see Emma. She's the fell pony that was part of the procession at the Queen's state funeral. You may remember she stood next to the long walk to Windsor Castle as Her Majesty's coffin was driven past the palace, saying Emma will continue to be much loved as the Queen would have wished for in Windsor. That's it. You're up to date on GB News. More news as it happens. Let's get back now to Alastair Stewart and friends.
Polly, thank you very much indeed. Returning now to our main topic, the Liz Truss premiership, and weaving in the events in Europe last week, not least that Prague gathering of 44 European heads of government. Liz Truss wrote in The Times this week, and I quote, "Security, energy and migration are three of the most urgent priorities for the British people, so they are top of my agenda too. That's why I'm travelling to Prague for today's European leaders' meeting." Now, when Truss was battling it out with Rishi Sunak during the Conservative leadership race, she failed to confirm if she viewed French President Macron as a friend or a foe. Well, this week it appeared that it was a resounding friend, with a meeting with the French president to symbolise unity, amongst other things they were said to have discussed, intending to end small boat crossings on the Channel. However, in a post-Brexit world, with the Northern Ireland Protocol problems still on the table and the continuing war in Ukraine, how will she fare in the European political community as a whole? To continue the conversation, I have asked back, and here he is, Sean Worth, the former Downing Street advisor and now political commentator. But I've also asked another old friend of mine, Dr. Dennis McShane, to join our conversation. Dennis is a former Minister of State for Europe and, of course, Labour Member of Parliament for Rotherham. Welcome, both of you. Can I come to you first? I asked you to go out there, grab a coffee and your notepad. Digby Jones, standout point on Truss, still sceptical about the budget, but he said, and I quote, "Not upgrading benefits by inflation is not a hill I would choose to die on."
Yeah, I think he's probably right. The big thing that business wants, I assume he was former chairman of CBI. Yeah. Big thing business wants is just a return to some sort of stability in the economy. After the absolute car crash of the 45p tax announcement, the last thing they want is another massive row on the economy and on finances. Uprating benefits with inflation is, I used to work on this sort of policy, is incredibly expensive. The argument always, funnily, historically, has been let's uprate them in line with earnings, because the inflation was always below earnings. Now it's the other way round. And we're really seeing a cost of living crunch for people right at the bottom of the kind of social, the financial scale, if you like. But yeah, I think he's probably right.
The other observation that was made, and I don't think you were here when I was talking to Digby, but it doesn't matter because it was another interview that I had which was intriguing on more your territory, and it was Roger Pollan, Dennis, who's the boss of the Federation of Small Businesses in Northern Ireland, and in the Prague-Macron context, he said, "This is the best change in mood music that we in Northern Ireland have seen for a long time, and it's not only us in the business community, it is people like Nigel Dodds now in the House of Lords, it is the political leadership, the DUP conference. They think something is shifting to their benefit."
I think that's right. And look at Steve Barclay, who is a tough Tory who headed the European Research Group, fanatically anti-European. He now, last week, said sorry for all the trouble, the accusations, the remarks he made. You can really sense peace breaking out there. Joe Biden has also made very clear to the Prime Minister that if, as she hopes, and King Charles III wants, that there's a big US state visit next year, they're not going to happen if the DUP and you mentioned Nigel Dodds, but the DUP conference yesterday said if the Northern Ireland Protocol isn't wished away, we're not going back into government, all that nonsense. So it's a big change in going into Europe. I mean, I was absolutely flabbergasted. I said at the time President Macron invited Liz Truss to come to this European political community, which is very much his brainchild for the non-EU countries or those in the waiting room. I thought she'd turn it down. Boris Johnson would have, Theresa May would have, but this is Liz going back to where she was before 2016.
On the clear condition, and she was on the record about it, and Macron seemed to acquiesce, was that this is not an attempt to redo EU or son of EU or even son of EEC. It is to talk about energy cooperation, industrial cooperation and Ukraine.
Trust me, Alastair, all the countries there are those that want to get into the EU. Everybody knows that. They're very glad. I mean, the common sense is breaking out. And talking about hills not to die on, Sean, my sense is that the steam is going out of the sort of hard Brexit obsessions of the country. I mean, it's not working at all well. We're not going to rejoin. Keir Starmer's made that clear. Everybody's making that clear. But we need new relationships. You had, for example, Suella Braverman saying, I'm going to give lots of money to the French to help to improve patrols and so on the Irish coastline. I fell off my seat this morning with dear old Nadine Norris, which, you know, her affectionate nickname in Tory MPs is Mad Nad. And she said, we've got to get rid of freedom of movement to allow telecom engineers from Europe, or the ban on freedom of movement, excuse me, to come in and start working on the fact. I went up to Liverpool for the Labour Party conference. On the train, 4G disappears, 3G disappears, everything disappears. I mean, we're a primitive backward country in terms of mobile telephony. And we haven't got the engineers, we haven't got the nurses, we haven't got the doctors. And here's Nadine Norris, not exactly a pro-European, not in my camp, saying, hey, open our borders to specialists who can do this work.
OK, hold that thought, because I've got another guest coming in who both of you are familiar with, and that is Sir John Redwood, the Conservative Member of Parliament for Woking. I'm a long-term critic, of course, of Europe, very much what we were talking about there, but also very much in favour of the sort of budget that Kwasi Kwarteng was finally able to deliver. John, a genuine technical question. How is the Kwarteng budget that you were so supportive of supposed to, in practice, deliver growth?
Well, I support the three-legged strategy, which I believe the government is embarking on. I did not support or recommend all of the measures in the tax package, but I'm always happy to see a government trying to lower tax rates, which could lead to more growth and more revenue. But we need the spending proposals so that we can see where we are overall on the total budget. And we need the so-called supply side measures, where there's going to be more investment, increasing capacity, where there can be helpful changes in regulation, where there can be joint public-private partnerships or public sector pump priming of good private sector expansions. These are all what I want to see in a growth strategy. So I think you slightly misintroduced me, and I gave them various bits of advice, which is all public on my website.
Absolutely.
Adopted some bits of it and not other bits of it.
Well, I tell you what's fascinating. I completely accept that slight rap over the knuckles, and if I misled people, I didn't mean to. I meant the main kind of thrust of lower tax and the rest of it is what you and I have talked about on many occasions in the past. But I'll tell you what's intriguing. I know you were waiting to join the conversation, but earlier on, Digby Jones, who served Gordon Brown in a Labour government, said exactly what you've just said. It doesn't hold water unless you do the costings of it, and some of the tax alterations were not good, in his view. Is there not somebody, as Sean Worth said a moment ago, a grown-up in Downing Street who can whisper either in Liz Truss's ear or in Kwasi's ear, get this right and it'll fly?
Well, I think it will. And my advice to them is to get on as quickly as possible with putting the other two legs on the three-legged stool of growth policy. And I believe that's what they intend to do. I think the sooner we know the spending plans and the borrowing plans, the better it's going to be. And the sooner we have more detail on how we can expand our capacity, because we are chronically short of capacity in energy, in a whole series of energy-intensive activities. We're very short of capacity for growing our own food. We're importing far too much. And it is a weakness of our economy, which developed over the European Economic Community and EU years, that we came to rely far too much on imports from the continent, leading to a very big balance of payments deficit, which needs financing either by borrowing from abroad or by selling assets to overseas interests. And I think we've gone too far in that direction. And this growth strategy has to be about restoring more of our self-sufficiency in temperate foods, getting back to energy self-sufficiency as we had before joining a common energy policy, very urgent, and there's much more we can do there and should do there now to exploit the natural advantages we have in energy, and having sensible energy pricing so that we can start to restore those big energy-using businesses, steel, glass, ceramics, aluminium, all the other things that were badly dented by our espousal of the European Union approach, which was don't do them here, import them from somewhere else.
Absolutely. The other side of that coin, and you built up to it perfectly with that answer, John, was what happened on Thursday in Prague. Did you sense that there were the signs of a new arrangement, a new understanding between that part of Europe that many folk, yourselves included, were very uncomfortable with, but a new Europe that might be mutually supportive, mutually helpful?
Well, I've always been in favour of us getting on well with the neighbours, but I want us to get on well with the neighbours as a self-governing country, and so I don't want us to re-enter any agreements where we're bossed around by a European court or by a vote we've lost in a group of 20 or 27 other member states. And that is what the British people voted to achieve, to be self-governing, but to be friendly and cooperative. And we've always said there need to be all sorts of arrangements with our partners in Europe, as with our partners in America or in Asia, to ensure smooth flow of trade and to make sensible arrangements over air flights, which don't happen to be an EU competence, and over shipping and over energy exchanges, because we joined a European energy scheme which made its sole purpose really to make every country much more import dependent on the others, so that there was a European angle to it all. Before we've got out of that and have got back to supplying our own energy, we obviously need sensible arrangements with them. We've been very generous to them in supplying a lot of gas over the summer where we've had a surplus. Let's hope they reciprocate by supplying back to us in the winter when we typically import.
John, great to talk to you. Thank you very much indeed. Sorry we kept you waiting while we sorted our end out, but always good to talk to you. Keep in touch. Thank you very much indeed. To John Redwood there, Conservative Member of Parliament for Woking. Quick reaction to that. I mean, extraordinary change of tone.
A very big change of tone. I mean, I've been tracking John in the House of Commons. I remember when he resigned and stood against John Major. I wonder if there's a junior John Redwood lurking in the undergrowth now, going to stand against Liz Truss. And he based his entire political life on a very strong anti-Europeanism. I didn't quite understand when he says we have to restore our energy independence. We're going to reopen the mines, bring back Arthur Scargill. We can't do that. We are interdependent, and it's naive to think we could have everything grown in Britain, all our energy coming out of Britain. But yes, I think there's a genuine change of tone. We're away from Boris Johnson. We're away from the anti-European positions.
And really quickly, John Redwood, Digby Jones agreeing on that key critique of the budget. The grown-ups have got to listen to that and act upon it.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, I like Dennis, I don't think realistic that we'll repatriate supply chains in medicines and food and all that. But energy, renewables energy, I'd say, is a massive one that Liz Truss has to deal with. But it requires a lot of spending and a lot of political.
I think we've got some shift going on today, and I'm grateful for that. Thank you much. And let's. I can now test my theory. I may be over-optimistic, but we'll see. Because I'm delighted to be joined now by a very good friend, Sir David Livington, former Minister of State for Europe and Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster, Minister in the Cabinet Office, Deputy Prime Minister, blah, 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 blah. David was Conservative MP for Aylesbury from 92 until 2019. Is something profound happening on the relationship between the United Kingdom and Europe?
I very much hope so. I was very heartened by the Prime Minister's decision to go to Prague for the launch of the this new European political community that President Macron initiated. But we've seen alongside that some other moves. I thought that Steve Baker's comments as the Northern Ireland Minister of State, we have to recognise Ireland has legitimate interests in the protocol issues. That, given where Steve is coming from in the European debate in my party, was a big step. And also hasn't had the headlines, but this last week the UK has decided to make the first sort of tiptoe into military cooperation with EU defence arrangements, something called PESCO, which is a sort of joint sort of military planning initiatives that the EU runs, about 60 projects under that. We have decided, as the Americans and the Norwegians already had done, to opt into a project on mobility to get armoured vehicles, troops, smoothly right across Europe, irrespective of what the relevant countries and EU's frontier controls would be. And that is, it's pragmatic, it's sensible, it's forward-looking, it's recognising that we are interdependent, that, we're out of the EU now, but we still have very important common interests with the other European
But also, to take a phrase and underline it many, many times from what you just said, we have chosen to, we have elected to, as the United Kingdom. We have not been told by Brussels to do X. That's the mood music that shifted quite significantly, isn't it, David?
Well, I think that's what the PM and the current government have actually realised. That, I mean, I would argue, as someone who was strongly pro-Remain, that the idea that we were being lectured to, dictated to, was always wildly exaggerated. But that debate was had in 2016 and people voted the way they did. I think that what is welcome is this move away from some of the very aggressive anti-EU rhetoric, where at times some of the people in the former Leave camp seem to think that the EU had to be seen to fail or collapse for them to justify their case. Actually, the British people took their decision, right or wrong, and we're in a different world, but we're in a world where our security interests in the face of the challenges, different types from Russia and from China, the fight against international crime and terrorism, the need to move towards net zero while preserving energy security, the need to manage a migratory challenge of vast numbers of people from Africa that is going to continue for at least a generation. The pressures aren't going to ease off next year anytime soon, and climate change will help drive further movement of people from Africa. All those things challenge every European country together, and we need to find ways of working cooperatively.
Final question, David. The other thing that challenges all of those European countries and around the world is the economy, is inflation, is high interest rates. Can this budget come good for Truss? Has the worm turned?
I think she's got a big challenge. I think that given what happened with the mini budget, I think what she has to show is, as your other guests have said, that the figures add up and that she satisfies the markets. But the markets aren't going to be satisfied if the government comes forward with solutions that don't stand a chance of getting through the House of Commons. So she's got to bring her MPs with her as well. The other thing that's just relevant, linking the two issues together, is that Boris Johnson's trade agreement with the EU actually comes up for review in 2025. So actually, one way of helping generate economic growth would be to try to improve on that agreement, to cooperate economically from outside membership of the EU, but with this vast trading bloc that's our most important trading partner, because that will give new opportunities, I hope, to British exporters who at the moment are finding that there's a lot of Brexit red tape that's blocking them from successful exports.
David, it's always a pleasure. Thank you for fitting us into your afternoon, and best to all of you there, and look forward to seeing you again very, very soon. Thank you very much indeed. David Lidington there. I thought this might work as a double-barreled theme, and I'm astounded, having listened to you, Dennis McShane, and having listened to John Redwood, and having now listened to David Lidington. Grown-ups, been there, done it on the question of Europe. Something profound is happening.
I think that's right. I'm not sure it's enough to save Liz Truss. And I say again, it was fascinating to have dear old John Redwood on there, because we all remember him trying to bust up John Major, actually causing him very serious damage. We couldn't believe our luck, Labour. I'm fascinated to see when the chicken run starts, when Boris Johnson, for example, who will certainly lose Uxbridge at the next election, starts appearing in Hampshire or Suffolk. I don't know where the very safe Tory seats are, schmoozing away and saying, hey, choose me instead. I mean, look, at the end of the day, Alastair, the Tories run Britain, have been running it for 200 years, and they do 10, 15, 18, maybe 20 years in government, but then the nation wants a change. And I think we're just reaching that point. Liz Truss is misfortune to become Prime Minister at that moment. Sure. I do think she chose a terribly poor Chancellor. He was given that advice by the Treasury and he ignored it. And now you have the Treasury fighting with the Chancellor, Sir John Cunliffe, actually writing and saying we had to save pension funds from the folly. He didn't use the word stupidity. I'll use that of Kwasi Kwarteng. At least Norman Lamont had the decency to resign. Jim Callaghan resigned when the pound was devalued, when you and I were kids. Kwasi Kwarteng's still hanging around, having drinks with Lord Ashcroft, champagne with hedge funds. He has to go.
Final minute goes to you, my friend Sean Worth. The other thing that struck me profoundly listening to Digby, John and indeed David, but also Mr McShane there to a degree, is it's not only the grown-ups on economic policy and party management that she needs to surround herself with, it's press people. All of my guests this morning, unexpectedly, have said much more positive things than the Sunday papers might have led you to believe they would say. That message is not getting out. If it doesn't get out, she's screwed.
Yeah, I mean, I said on your show, actually, a little while ago, when Truss was being inflated by some of the press, that they will then turn on her.
Yes,
that's what they do. They push her up and then they turn her, because that's the entertainment that they give us, and it's fantastic. In order to try and manage that, you need to do a thing that's called, in comms, it's called feed the beast. You've got to give positive announcements. I think the challenge for Truss is exactly that, having a team, a serious team that can come forward and with the ideas that's needed. I think the biggest thing that she could do is just build stuff, build houses, build infrastructure. Yeah. That requires planning reform, which I don't think the party will deliver.
And that should be in the November statement.
I hope so. Yeah. But I'm nervous that she won't be able to do that, and I think that's what saves her for for the election. It saves us getting wiped out so badly, I think.
You're both stars, and I'm grateful. Both friends as well. Let's do it again soon. But for that crisp analysis, I'm very grateful. Dennis McShane and Sean Worth, thank you both very, very much indeed. You particularly, having had 2 bites of the charity. Very, very good of you. We've lots more to come in the remaining 32 minutes of Alastair Stewart and Friends. After the break, tributes have been paid to the 10 victims of that ghastly explosion at a petrol station that happened on Friday in County Donegal. We'll be speaking to our reporter next, who's been covering the story for us. But first, a quick break.
Weekday afternoons on GB News, we've got the whole of the UK covered. From 12 to 3, it's GB News Day with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Gloria De Piero. You'll get the very latest on everything that's been going on across our great nation.
And from 3 till 6, watch out for GB News Live with me, Patrick Christys. I'm not here to mess around with all the biggest topics and guests. You will always be up to date. GB News Day and GB News Live from 12 p.m.
Only on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens,
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and tune-in apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch.
You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh, my goodness me. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
Hello, I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m, where I'll be joined by 2 of the country's top comedians as we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight. If it's a big story, we'll be covering it, I guarantee, but we'll also have some fun along the way. That's GB News Headliners at 11 p.m. We won't put you to sleep, unlike some of the other paper review shows out there. So join us, 11 p.m, 7 nights a week.
The headlines on GB News: a community is in shock and tributes are being paid to 10 people, including 3 children, who were killed at an explosion at a filling station in County Donegal in Ireland on Friday. The 10 people have been named as Leona Harper, James O'Flaherty, Martin McGill, Robert Garr and his daughter Shauna, Jessica Gallagher, Martina Martin, Catherine O'Donnell and her son James, and Hughie Kelly. They were among those who lost their lives in the small community of Creesla in County Donegal on Friday. The Taoiseach Michael Martin has visited the site of the explosion, and he has said the entire nation is mourning following the tragedy. The Irish authorities say the explosion being treated as a tragic accident still, although investigations are ongoing. Also in the news today, 185 people, including 19 children, are said to have died in protests across Iran over the last 3 weeks. Demonstrations began in mid-September after the funeral of Mahsa Amini, who died after she was detained by the so-called morality police over allegations that she was wearing her hijab too loosely. According to the human rights group in Iran, hundreds of women and girls from high schools and universities have been taking part in protests across the country, despite allegations of brutal treatment towards them and accusations the authorities are using tear gas and live ammunition to disperse them. And Buckingham Palace has released a new image of one of the Queen's favourite ponies. If you're watching on television, you can see Emma, a fell pony, who was part of the procession at the Queen's state funeral and stood next to the long walk to Windsor Castle as Her Majesty's coffin was driven past. The palace saying Emma will continue to be much loved and cared for in Windsor. Those are your headlines. We're back in half an hour.
Polly, thanks very much indeed. Tributes are indeed being paid to the 10 victims of that devastating blast at a petrol station in the Crosslough area of Ireland. The explosion claimed the lives of 4 men, 3 women, 2 teenagers and a girl of primary school age. A search operation at the scene has concluded. Meanwhile, Irish police believe that the explosion was caused by an accident, but they aren't ruling out other causes. Ireland's Premier, Michael Martin, who visited the site of the explosion, says the entire nation is mourning following the tragedy. Our Northern Ireland reporter, Dougie Beattie, joins us now from Donegal. Dougie, the standout comment yesterday for me was from the Garda chief, who said, "I didn't have to ask anybody to come and help. They all just turned up."
As has he in the last few minutes. He's just over my shoulder. Drew Harris came in to look at exactly what the situation is. All morning here this morning, the Health and Safety Authority have been in, as has specialised Garda teams, looking to find out exactly what was at the cause of this horrendous blast that cost so many lives. Don't forget there's 8 also in hospital. One of them is still not in good shape. But Drew Harris, the Garda Commissioner, was also a Deputy Chief Constable of the PSNI in Northern Ireland, so he's well known to both sides of the border. But that cooperation has always been there with the ambulance and fire services, even with our Coast Guards, our helicopters and our ambulances that come in. But there is now, at the bottom of this all, names and pictures of people coming out, and we're starting to know the story of who they are. Amongst them are mothers and sons, fathers and daughters and cousins. This is how close this community was and how many that actually perished here.
Yeah, very, very moving, particularly, again, the young girl with such a promising rugby career ahead of her, now so cruelly cut short. You're also a hard-nosed reporter, so I've got to ask you this as well. The authorities were very upfront last night and this morning in the belief that it was probably a gas explosion, but quite rightly they cannot rule out the full panoply of investigation. And I guess that's what's going on right now, as you just said a moment ago.
Well, it is, and it is for a number of reasons. And first of those is really the grieving process here. This hasn't been a terrorist attack or something that people can put a blame on. They have got to grieve and they've got to know why their loved ones lost their lives so tragically and so spectacularly. It is astounding to think that all these little communities here will have someone in it. If you can imagine, some of these communities in the past would have went to one funeral. You will imagine that all of these communities will go to all 10 funerals because it is that closely linked. But they are looking for other things in and around without speculating too much. But I would imagine that they'll be looking for blame that might bring in regulations and so forth.
Diggy Beattie, thank you very much indeed for your calm reporting on what is a horrendous, complicated story, but also one of profound human sadness as well. Dougie, you look after yourself. Thank you. Diggy Beattie there, our Ireland correspondent. You're watching and listening to Alastair Stewart and Friends, with plenty more still to come in the remaining 23 minutes or so of the programme, including how a soup and shake diet could help reverse type 2 diabetes in as little as 3 months. But does the rising cost of healthy food limit our chances of having a better diet? But first, a quick break.
Weekday afternoons on GB News, we've got the whole of the UK covered. From 12 to 3, it's GB News Day with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Gloria De Piero. You'll get the very latest on everything that's been going on across our great nation.
And from 3 till 6, watch out for GB News Live with me, Patrick Christys. I'm not here to mess around with all the biggest topics and guests. You will always be up to date. GB News Day and GB News Live from 12 p.m.
Only on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and TuneIn apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch.
You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh, my goodness me. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
Hello, I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m, where I'll be joined by 2 of the country's top comedians as we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight. If it's a big story, we'll be covering it, I guarantee, but we'll also have some fun along the way. That's GB News Headliners at 11 p.m. We won't put you to sleep, unlike some of the other paper review shows out there. So join us, 11 p.m, 7 nights a week.
Hello and welcome back. It's 20 to 2. You're watching and listening to Alastair Stewart and Friends here on GB News, TV, radio and online. I asked you last night and again this morning to get in touch on our big topics of the day. Can Liz Truss survive? Should she? And will the budget eventually come to her rescue? Carol says Liz Truss should be given time to see how her policies work out. We need to put in place long-term growth plans instead of resorting to knee-jerk short-term actions. Businesses only prosper with sound long-term plans. The same is true for the United Kingdom. Growth is the sensible answer. Annette says benefits are not the one. She is ideological. That was something Digby Jones said a little earlier in the programme. She's ideological, says Annette. That's not what the electorate will vote for in 2024. Ouch. And this one comes from Sally, who says, should I waste my time watching the media's constant attacks on Liz? No. Anyone suggesting that a Prime Minister who's only been in the job for a month should go isn't worth listening to. With respect, Sally, I haven't said that, nor have any of my guests. We've all been trying to examine whether what's happening in Europe and relationships with the United Kingdom and Northern Ireland on the protocol and in the economy may or may not give her breathing space. And I hope if you go to our YouTube channel and listen to the interviews that I've done today and perhaps listen back to them, you'll see it was not an attack on anybody. So don't forget to subscribe to that YouTube channel and watch it all. Now, this is a great bit of news. Recent NHS trial has suggested that certain food regime, including soups and shakes, might just help reverse type 2 diabetes. It found that restricting your calorie intake to 850 calories a day showed promising results. What's more, doctors will be able to start prescribing the diet as early as next year. But another question is, does the rise in healthy food prices limit our chances of having a healthy diet? Now, I'm delighted to be welcomed by someone who has over a decade of experience looking after patients in the NHS and is passionate about addressing health inequalities in the ethnic minority groups in England, and that is Dr. Anita Raja, who is an NHS GP. Great to see you. Did this development specifically about type 2 diabetes surprise you, or as someone who cares passionately about good quality healthy food come to you as, yeah, that's obvious, that we were just a matter of time before we discovered it?
No, definitely. It didn't surprise me at all. But as you've already mentioned, the biggest issue that we've got here now is rising living costs, food prices. And it's so difficult to have a healthy diet, especially if you're worried about paying your energy bills. So this is a very positive step forward. And it's certainly... We've already known for years on end that if you lose 5 to 10% of your body weight, you will go into remission in terms of your diabetes. And now that the NHS is actually willing to help people and provide them with the right diet, I mean, I think nothing could be better.
It's an interesting crossover because I know you're the same about self-help is crucial, and the more we can do for ourselves, the better it is. But this is a brilliant development in the sense that it will take some of the pressure off people like yourself, GPs, and God forbid if something goes wrong, then hospitals as well. If we can look after ourselves to get through this challenge, it's a win-win.
Definitely £10 billion a year spent on diabetes. I mean, that is a huge cost. And 1 in 20 prescriptions that GPs, people like us, do are for diabetes-related medications. And if you look at the BAME community, they're 6 times more likely to develop diabetes. So someone like me, unfortunately, has a genetic predisposition to develop diabetes. However, there are modifiable risk factors and non-modifiable risk factors, and diet is a modifiable risk factor. And as I've said, now that we're providing this diet, it is specialist-led, it's led by dietitians. It's a 3-month course of shakes and alternative diet that's given to you. You restrict your calories, and the results are amazing. I mean, you lose something like 13 kilograms, which is over 2 stones in 3 months, and 7 kilograms, which is over 1 stone in the first month alone. I mean, your quality of life changes completely.
I'll play devil's advocate, knowing that there will be people listening to the conversation who will hate me for it and others who will applaud me. But if it's that commonsensical and it's healthy food and shakes, why is the NHS and indirectly the taxpayer having to pay for it? Shouldn't I be doing it myself?
Well, the thing is, not everyone can afford it. I'll be honest to you. If you want to buy raspberries, a packet is what, £2.50? Whereas if you'd go to a fast food chain down any street of the country, you can get a big packet of fries for £1. So sometimes it's just cheaper to revert to something that's not healthy. Unfortunately, when we look at real life data, since 1975, the cases of obesity have tripled globally. And in developed countries, obesity and diabetes are linked, and obesity and poverty or a low socioeconomic status is linked. Hence, it's very difficult for people to afford a healthy diet. It's easier said than done. I understand that this is common sense, but we've got to understand that not everybody can go and buy a packet of raspberries for £2.50 when they've got the option of having a full meal with a fizzy drink for £2.50.
Now, I completely understand both the economics of it, the medicine less so, but I defer to you, but I get the point. But I'll tell you what, it reminded me of a conversation I was having earlier with Sean Worth, who used to be a number 10 Downing Street political advisor. It's about messaging, isn't it? Therese Coffey, the new Secretary of State for Health, needs to sit down, have a chat with people like you and say, look, actually, it may cost the taxpayer a little bit, but it's going to save the NHS a great big bit. Get the message out there.
Exactly. More than 600,000 admissions within the NHS around 2016, 2017, just due to obesity-related issues. I mean, it's a huge load on the NHS. And I think this is, as you've said, rightly identified, going to help the NHS. It's going to help the taxpayer in the long run.
We've got about a minute left, and it's always good to talk to you. But take that minute, if you will, to give me and other people just some general advice, bearing in mind the cost of living, inflation and all the rest of it, on your top tips for cheap, healthy living, cheap, healthy food.
The thing is that if you look at carbohydrates, high carbohydrates will give us more cravings. So essentially, if you'll have a packet of chips or fries or fish and chips or a burger, that's going to make you hungrier. And there's now science behind the fact that if we choose to have a low carb diet, we'll have less cravings. So if you have one chocolate, that may not be enough. So essentially, switching your diet might be a good idea. Now we've got intermittent fasting. There's so much information on the internet out there, and it's excellent for people who are struggling with their weight. The initial 7 days, of course, it's going to be difficult for you because you will have your cravings, but it takes only 2 weeks for your brain to develop a habit, and then you can revert to a healthier lifestyle. I mean, it's astounding. If you look at the shocking figures, 1/3 of primary school children are obese, and 2/3 of people within England, adults, are obese. So we certainly need to look at our diet and try to reduce our weight. And if we do half an hour of exercise 3 times a week, that's not going to cost anything. And we certainly can help lose weight with that, and that will then help our diabetes.
Anita Raja, as I said, it's always a pleasure to talk to you. Powerful arguments and succinctly put. Thank you very much indeed for breaking into your Sunday afternoon. And great to talk to you. Keep in touch, Anita. Thank you very much indeed. Anita Raja there, who is herself an NHS GP with wisdom for us all. Let's end with what I think has the makings of being that rare, elusive thing, some genuinely good news. Tesco are freezing prices on more than 1,000 products and have managed to give their workers a 20p an hour pay rise as well. Asda have also announced that their own in-store cafes will be offering a hot soup, roll and unlimited hot drinks for £1 this November and December for over 60s to help them keep warm and keep fed this winter. Much of this started with the new kids on the block, Iceland. It's a group that's had its ups and downs, and my next guest helped steer it to where it now thrives. Iceland are holding prices across the piece and offering cheaper, high-quality goods, taking on the bigger brands on the high street. Potentially, there's one big winner, and that's us, the consumer. Bill Grimesy is the former CEO of Iceland, and before that was also a big player at Tesco. Bill, good to see you. Thank you very much indeed. Bosses aren't charities. Why is this happening now?
Well, these companies are coming under enormous pressure to address what's going on in the general environment. I mean, we are facing the perfect storm right now, based on the cost of living crisis, what's happening with energy and bills at home, and of course what's happened in the last 10 days from government, which has completely taken the markets by surprise. So what happens to big supermarket chains is that they've got 3 things that they control. One is they're going after more sales, the other is to protect their margin, and the third is to look at their cost base. Now, in an environment where people people are strapped for cash, it's going to be the big guys that really come out with all guns blazing, like Tesco, and say, look, we're going to look after you customers in a very difficult environment. We're going to look after our staff and make sure that they've got the right wages in place. And they're going to put pressure on their supplier base to make sure they keep prices as low as they can. And the main reason for that is that they've got to protect the top line sales. If any of these companies lose 1%, 2% or 3% of top line sales, they will fall into very difficult troubles.
Can I add one thing to that list? And I'm going to come to the supply chain in a moment because that's crucial. But one thing before that is they've also, however nice they want to be and social conscience and all of that, they've got to keep their shareholders sweet, turn a profit and pay a dividend.
Well, they do. And I think Tesco have demonstrated over the years that they can do that. You mentioned Iceland at the front of this piece. They don't have to do that. They don't have shareholders. It's owned by a family, and they can take decisions. It's a private company. It's not under public scrutiny like Tesco is. Asda is now a private company. Morrison's has just been taken private through CD&R, a private equity company, and of course those models are really desperate to get cash into their system because they've bought them with leveraged debt. So you've got these dynamics going on in the background against a situation where the general public is faced with huge problems with managing their budgets. Their mortgages are going up because of what's happened in the last 10 days. Their energies have been capped, but it's still at a very high price. They're getting a tax rebate, but it's going to be offset by other things. So at the end of the day, what is going to be the available disposable income for the masses? It's going to be probably a bit lower. So what do the big guys do? They come out all guns blazing to protect their top line. And I see people like Tesco and Asda as winners. I see Morrison's probably as a loser. Aldi and Lidl certainly as winners. Iceland, well, it's a smaller player, and I think the managing director of Iceland said the other day, was he concerned about the competition from Lidl? And he said, no, I'm more concerned about the competition from food banks. Yeah. Well, that's a very serious statement to make. So it's an interesting, challenging time to see what happens. But I think I'm safe in saying this, that everything will happen in this marketplace to keep prices as low as possible in order to go for top-line sales.
Which takes me to my final point. You raised it earlier. I promised I'd come back to it. If you're a farmer or any part of the supply chain delivering your goods, your product to supermarket shelves, it's a blooming tough existence. This means, lovely as it is for consumers, it's going to get even tougher for suppliers.
Yes, I think it will, but the old adage is you've got to make sure there's enough oxygen in the supply chain for everybody to survive, because the big guys need those products to come through. So it's a fine balance, but yes, they will come under huge pressure.
Bill, great to talk to you again. Thank you very much indeed. Always a pleasure, and have a great Sunday afternoon. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Bill Grimsey there. I think I said Grimesy earlier on. I apologise for that profusely. Former CEO of Iceland and also head of customer services, I think it was at Tesco. You've been busy bunnies from start to finish, for which I'm genuinely very, very grateful. Let's pick up some more, starting off with Karen, who says, Parliament's back next week. Let's see who the big guns really are. I know who I'm backing, and it's never Labour. Ouch. Mike says, I hope that Liz Truss would be good, but she couldn't have had a worse start. Her choice of Chancellor, Kwasi Kwarteng, is poor, as he seriously messed up his mini-budget and caused financial chaos for the Bank of England to intervene. Shows that he's the wrong man for the job. Well, interesting, two of my guests certainly said it may be time to have a closer think about who surrounds Liz Truss in number 10 Downing Street, both in terms of advisers, but also maybe senior ministers. Watch this space. Peter joins the conversation. Can we trust Truss to deliver? The jury is still out on that. Hopefully, her plan to help with people's energy bills is a success, and her budget, with a couple of U-turns in direction, helps get the economy moving in the right direction. And finally, Chris says, give Liz some space and credit. Well, I hope you'd all agree that what we've tried to do is have intelligent conversations about how the ground is shifting and the challenges she faces. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel. We're at GB News. All the interviews are there and the previous programmes. I look forward to seeing you 12 o'clock on Saturday. Until then, a very good afternoon to you. Bye-bye.
So looking ahead to this afternoon then, and the UK is looking mainly dry for southern and central areas, but wet and windy in the north. Let's home in on that detail. So wet and windy this afternoon for Scotland, with gales actually decreasing in the north for a while. Skies likely to brighten in the west later, highs of 14. And that wet and windy weather continuing across Northern Ireland. Drier and brighter weather though moving in later. Northern England will begin dry and bright this afternoon, but rain arrives later towards dusk. Winds strengthening, highs of 15 or 16 Celsius. Let's look at Wales now. Mainly dry and bright this afternoon, but turning increasingly cloudy and patchy rain developing across the far northwest. Winds strengthening with highs of around 17. The Midlands remaining dry until after dark, with the best of the sunshine across the east of the region. Those southwesterly winds picking up with highs reaching the mid-teens. And focusing on East Anglia, that's dry and fine this afternoon. Plenty of spells of sunshine, in fact. The southerly breeze strengthening, highs of 18 or 19. So that dry weather continuing then for the south of England, or the western areas will see skies turning increasingly hazy through the afternoon. Highs 18 or 19. Tempered slightly, we're told, by the breeze. And that band of rain continuing to move south as we move into the evening. Blustery showers following on, and that's how the weather's shaping up for today.
Join me, Nana Akua, on Friday, Saturday and Sunday afternoons on GB News. Expect fiery debate and passionate discussion as me and my panel tackle some of the biggest topics hitting the headlines. It's a place for everyone's opinion. No one gets cancelled, but no one gets an easy ride.
Oh, she's on it today.
Be ready for conversations that are fierce, frank, and of course, fun. Every Friday, Saturday and Sunday afternoon from 4 p.m. on GB News.
Weekday afternoons on GB News, we've